Good morning, good day, good evening, greetings and salutations. My name is Tristan Watty, and welcome. We'll add on top of that Sunday for the Safe Room featuring security side quests. I am one of your hosts, and I am joined by the other host, which is Russ. Hi, Russ.
Hey, how you doing today?
I am doing fine because it is a happy Monday because it's another Safe Room side quest day. So, with that note, for you joining for the first time, let us reintroduce ourselves in a kind of detailed manner. Let's dive deep because my name is Tristan Watty. I come to you from the AWS Professional Services team where we help to accelerate your journey to the cloud in a secure manner. And that's why I'm a security consultant. And Russ, where are you coming from?
Hi, I'm coming from the customer incident response team where we help customers remediate and fix their incident response situations. So, yeah.
So a little bit. I don't know if it's fire and ice and fire, or lightning or something like that. But we'll add a hi on top of that to everyone who's joining in as well. So thank you, as always, for joining us. And if you would like to share, where's everyone from? We always like to see if you're tuning in from the States, from outside the States, from around the States. Right? We're kind of state biased because I'm over on the East Coast, and Russ, you're in the... I always want to say kind of like it's like a couple degree over East Coast, something like that.
Yeah, that's
right. But we like to have fun here on our show because that's how we build up the experience points, right? So another way to do that is asking a second question. And it's a fun question at that. And it is, what's your favorite card game? This is an interesting one that we can pose. But first, Russ, favorite card game?
Yeah, I really wanted to be interesting with this one, but I have to give it up to Uno. I mean, it's a classic for a reason now.
Yeah. Uno has brought together a lot of people and separated a lot of people. It's one of those type of games where first it starts off with the rules, right? Is what rule set do you follow?
Yeah, just trying to get people to agree to the rules is already fight worthy.
Yeah, it's like, do you stack? Do you not stack? Can you put a card down after? Yeah, we can have a whole episode on that, right?
Rules of Uno.
Yeah, rules of Uno. Maybe we can optimize that with Gen AI.
A multi-part episode.
Yeah, right?
Rules for this edition.
Yeah, exactly. And if you picked Uno, that's a good choice because I think the next one I would have to go with, as they say, the favorite children's card game, Yu-Gi-Oh! Right? Yeah, it's just one of those things. And if you get that reference, 10 points to you, because it's another one of those interesting pieces of, childhood, right? When you have your Yu-Gi-Oh cards, your Pokemon cards, so on and so forth. But playing was Yu-Gi-Oh for me. Trading was Pokemon. So if anybody else out there does the same, 10 points to you, right? And today we have another fun continuation of what we're talking about from a security perspective. And what may that be? Well, Russ is going to tell you where we came from last week.
So last week was our Macy episode. So it was Macy used Scan. It's super effective. We were talking about DLP tools. So going over primarily Macy for looking for critical information or sensitive information within your environment. So this week, our episode is it's time to detect AWS DLP solutions. So we're going to get a little bit into more specifics and a little bit less focused on Macy and a little bit of just an overall, DLP solutions and what those would look like in an AWS environment.
Exactly. And 10 points to Russ for doing the detector, right? Because it hits upon a couple of different points, right? Because we started with Macy and now we're trying to figure out, okay, what's our overarching DLP solution, right? Mm-hmm. Because it may not just be AWS native services. You might include other services and third-party integrations, but you want to understand your holistic approach. And to do that, you kind of have to find out what are the foundations first from an AWS perspective. What are some of the native capabilities that we can take advantage of, right? Because at the core of DLP is data loss prevention, right? That's what we like to kind of spell it out to be. So Macy was one of them, where you can have a function to automate sensitive data discovery. But you also have to think about, do you have something like AWS config, where you have compliance monitoring? Do you have guard duty for threat detection? Do you have CloudWatch for monitoring data access patterns? All of these different pieces of the puzzle come together to create somewhat of a baseline. And then from there, you start to build upon, in a multi-layered fashion, your DLP detection mechanism, right? And this leads to your overall comprehensive defensive strategy. So we always like to talk about the onion, the defense in depth, the castle. There's so many analogies to it, but the main thing to take away is stack, right? We'll use the Uno, right, methods. We stack here. So if we go around that same methodology, you want to see, okay, can you do something like content inspection? Can you do a contextual analysis? Can you do behavioral monitoring? Right? Can you minimize false positives while maximizing your own protection? And all these questions start to help you understand how you can start to build up that multi-pronged defense, right? So as we start to go, now maybe there's something you want to integrate that may not be part of the AWS native tool stack. Well, that's the beauty of it. There's integrations with third-party DLP solutions, right? Especially within the AWS environments. So think about the different ways you would integrate. Would it be through something like a VPC endpoint, an API gateway, something in the transfer family? What? A couple of different items, because you often have to consider, okay, maybe you have some hybrid environments, and maybe you have to establish data flows from, different types of endpoints, right? For example. And then after that, you go into, hey, what's the overall response to remediation if something is happening? That's the important kind of end cap is, okay, how do I have some automated remediation, right? And then we start to get into conversations like step functions and lambdas, to say the least, right? So with all that being said, now we can start to get into maybe our first poll, because I think that kind of sets us up for the rest of the episode, right, Russ? So
yeah.
If we select 1, 2, 3, or 4, which security layer matters most? This is an interesting one. And it also depends on perspective. But Russ, I throw it to you. Where do you go?
Well, I may be, I don't know, slightly biased in the response realm. So I'm gonna have to choose that. But I think we're gonna obviously go over, after we get our responses, how each of them has its own, importance and really builds upon the whole defense in depth. Yep, that's what I go to. But each has their place. So
yeah, and I think that's the important part, is each one of these have a piece, and we kind of, I would say, jest when it says, oh, which one matters most? Well, it's all part of a comprehensive strategy. But if we wanted to be biased for a sec, Russ goes to response, I go to the prevention side. Prevention peak, right? SCPs, let's go. Right? It's for me, when you start to think of, hey, which security layer matters most, one of the things that I've seen is when you're trying to accelerate to the cloud, I've seen customers say, hey, we'll get back to implementing these controls, right? And when they do that, the chances of them coming back to it is usually after they speak with Russ. So what you want to do is have those preventative strategies built in already, right? So
that's why they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, I wanted to make a random Kingdom Hearts joke, but I'll let it slip for today. But we also want to go back. Russ wants to know where I was going with it, but
I do.
Now a question. Wall says, do you have a partnership with Microsoft for multi-cloud scanning in Purview? They have S3 and RDS in preview. Oh, I would say thanks for sending that in the chat. And that's something that maybe if it's in the works or something along those lines, at some point you'll read about it in announcements. So I would say there's a couple different mechanisms for getting the news. We always talk about AWS blogs from the security side. We talk about hey, what's new in the service? Or even when you sign into your accounts, you kind of see, hey, this is what the latest news has been. So for that type of question, I would say take a look and kind of continue to review those items. But thanks for asking.
I would also just like to say that this comment really had me excited for a second, because I thought that somebody had put in response for the poll, but it looks like it was just part of S3, and it just grabbed that and put it into our poll. So I got really excited for a second, but it was a false positive. So it was the S3.
Isn't it ironic? A false positive on a DLP conversation, right?
Brutal.
So interesting. Completely fine, and it adds to the overall fun. So thanks for sharing, and continue to ask questions. We like to feel like everyone's part of the show, right? So the way to do that is, hey, let's talk about some more DLP solutions and things of that nature, right? We started to go down the route of kind of breaking down the different domains through our jest of a poll. And if you haven't gotten it, some of the themes come back to a certain card game of a Yugi variety, I'll say. The other parts, right?
Oh,
yeah. Okay. See, Russ got it. So when you go back to what we first spoke about, is foundations of AWS native DLP capabilities, right? When you start to get there is core AWS services. What are they? What can be some of the fundamentals that you take a look at? Well, one of the things of any cloud security strategy to start off with is, okay, do you have something like KMS in place, right? Do you have CloudTrails for your logging and your auditing? Do you have IAM fine-grained and functioning along the lines of least privilege, right? Least privilege. But also something like Macy. I know we spoke about it last week, but you can see how everything starts to stack into that defense in depth approach, right? Because you start to get towards, hey, what do I need to put into place? I think the question stems from, or we work backwards from, what are your regulatory requirements? Do you have something like GDPR or HIPAA or PCI DSS? What is your overall strategy? And that can start to help shape some of the core data protection services that you're leveraging. Some of the other things is, okay, now what can we leverage that maybe has built-in functionalities that meet and check those requirement boxes off? So just to pick on Macy for a second. So if we have a S3 bucket, now we can use Macy to search for sensitive information within that S3 bucket, right? And in that S3 bucket, now let's keep going along those same lines. Now you can start to think about, okay, my S3 bucket, is it secure? And what I mean by that is, do you have bucket policies? Do you have, let's see, automated data classification mechanisms, right? Do you have some object tags? And the reason why I say that is usually what we've seen customers do is they put everything to S3 bucket and they say, okay, our data's in here. But what type of data? Is it your sensitive data? Is it your regular data? Is it your logging data? And is it all in one bucket or is it separated? And then that starts to get into the different conversations, right? So these are all the factors that you should start to consider, along with, cost considerations for leveraging the different solutions within your environment. But the main takeaway that you want to start to think about is, okay, what are we trying to work backwards from? Is it our own regulatory requirements that we have within our organization or our customer environment? Or is there a third party like a HIPAA or PCI or things of that nature that you're trying to adhere to? So common things. I don't know, Russ, what are your thoughts on that? Kind of like the foundation pieces.
Yeah, I mean, definitely agree with that. I think that those are a lot of the things that I don't see with the customers that I deal with, the ones that are actively dealing with incidents. So I have seen when these aren't implemented and how much trouble that can cause, not just from getting compromised, but also your response to a compromise. So yes, absolutely. Know where your data is and especially where your critical data is. That's super important. You can't protect things without knowing what and where they are, right? So when you're talking about, data loss, you want to be able to know where your data is and how much there is. So in case there is a loss, So yeah, overall, it's the basics that get people, I think, the most.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why we always suggest taking that step back while we're speaking and talking about what data is to your company, your organization, right? Because what may be sensitive to one company may not necessarily be sensitive to another company, right? Because if there's the secret sauce, the Krabby Patty formula, or something along those lines that you don't want to get out, right? That is very sensitive to that specific company. But if you don't tag something saying, hey, this is our top secret, super duper Krabby Dab, whatever formula, then you start to get down the route of, okay, how do we do this? And that's when we started to go into something like custom identifiers, things of that nature within Macy, right? So it picks up that those different pieces of the puzzle. But the other side of that is you want to know, hey, if you're leveraging the AWS native services, okay, what about the third-party services as well, right? Because now you have to consider your data workflow as a whole, right? Because what you've often seen is, okay, my data starts here, and then there's a bunch of question marks in between, and it ends up here. And within there could be replication happening. There could be copies happening. And then data could just be stored just because somebody set something up within the organization to say, okay, we always want a copy of our data, so just clone it over here, right? And with that, maybe it doesn't get into your DLP solution. And now you have this kind of gap within your organization. So that's why we always talk about the data classification and kind of the data workflow as a whole, right?
Yeah.
So important pieces of the puzzle that something like tagging will really help with. And I keep saying tagging because I've seen organizations, they don't have tagging methodologies in place. And usually they find out that during either hopefully a tabletop exercise or the real event occurs within their environment.
Yeah.
So I would say when we start to go down the routes of just, hey, understanding what some of the combinations are. I think, Russ, what have you seen from your side when it comes to the combos?
So for combos, definitely see the Macy and Lambda combo a lot, or Macy and EventBridge, or even guard duty with EventBridge, especially because, what's the point of detections if they're not going to let you know? So yeah, as far as like the combos, I think that's the ones I see most often.
Yeah.
For good reason too.
Yeah. And that's the thing. There's some classic combos, right? It's kind of like the burger and fries and then the hot dog and fries, right? But
and then I think start getting in there and throwing in some pineapple, and you're like, does this ruin everything?
Or does it make it excellent? Yeah. Who knows?
Depends who you ask.
Yeah, right. We got to do a poll for that. But I digress. I think one of the pieces is like, have you seen particular Macy, Guard Duty, and CloudWatch, right? I think that's one of the combos, if we're talking about some of the bread and butter of what builds out like security backbones, because Macy does this sensitive data discovery that complement Guard Duty's kind of like threat detection. And then you have CloudWatch for the monitoring, right? Because you have operational monitoring in place. So
yeah, that's actually something that doesn't get I think, talked about enough. And didn't bring it up last week because it was a little bit of our, I'd say, more simple, like an introduction to DLP and Macy. So this week, definitely want to bring up, the actual, because you talked about monitoring, and so having to be able to use real-time detection on Macy versus batch detection, I think is pretty key, especially because we know that customers are cost sensitive, right? Cost is everything to a business. So you can use real-time detection, meaning it is constantly monitoring, in order to have an immediate response to something, say for high security environments, for extra compliance requirements, or just that extremely sensitive data that if anything does happen, you want to know immediately. And then for other things that are maybe a little bit less sensitive, time sensitive, not saying that any of this is not sensitive, but for less time sensitive things, like for example, like a regular periodic audit or doing a retrospective on something, you can schedule those scans, which it's a lot more resource efficient, especially for large data sets. The real-time detection is just too much too often. So I like that that's there, and that you have that ability to be able to go, okay, this is important. This is what I want to be monitoring all the time. And then this is not worth the extra cost, so we'll do this in a batch schedule as opposed to all the time. And so I do think that's something important that, and I bring that up first because, we're discussing, how Macy is able to combine with GuardDuty and CloudWatch, right? And so you have that synergy, between these services, like Macy looking through, finding data, then it uses GuardDuty because it integrates with GuardDuty to allow you to actually have an alert that pops up and follows the rest of your detection strategy. And then with CloudWatch, able to actually go back and look through and with the centralized logging and alerting to be able to, more quickly find out what that Macy alert was about and what actual data it was, referring to. So there's because they're so closely integrated, that how it detects real-time versus batch is important for kind of going through the whole process, right? So like, because GuardDuty is a detection service, how it detects and on what schedule is extremely important to consider in your DLP, program, or your overall security posture, whatever that might be. Again, depending on how much sensitive data that your environment is storing and dealing with. So yeah, you can, definitely like classify the data, with tags and stuff like that. Not just because it's, sensitive data, but it's also just any data in general within your environment. You'd like to know what that is. So tagging, I like to think of that as, if you have, say, a file system on a database or on a server somewhere, right? You're probably going to name those files, right? And have them kind of logically organized, right?
I just go file 1, 2, 3.
Well, I see it a lot in S3. So, maybe think of it more of a file system that actually tells you what's in it. But yeah, so classification strategies. I know that there are, different ML models, that allows the system to be able to kind of get as much of that contextual understanding. But it is for the most part, I think that the most common is probably the hierarchical classification system. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I think it's that mix of everything you were saying with there's cost considerations on top of your overall, I would say, the target state security strategy, but what are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve when it comes to real-time versus batch detections, right? Usually it goes to, okay, how can I optimize and leverage the tools that I have in a way that is cognizant of the one, data sensitivity, the business criticality, and I would say operational constraints, right? How many people that you have actually looking and responding to these different threats, right? So when you do this, you start to think of, okay, if I have a real-time like detection mechanism, maybe using something like a CloudWatch events and a Lambda, right? Kind of it handles the immediate threats that you can handle in such a way that maybe it corresponds to your overall organizational structure. And I mean organizational structure from top down technical wise, as well as from your people person, right? That's one of the things we always talk about is like, oh, what is your overall people culture? And what I mean by people culture is, hey, if something were to happen, is everybody able to respond to it in the same efficient way, right? We were talking about the response and the recover side of this. Do we have to wait for the one person that's on a beach in order to, do anything when it comes to this? So these are the kind of things that you want to make sure that you have the proper playbooks and run books, and we'll tell you which specific ones towards the end of the show. But I would also say, hey, Victor says when you uninstall and CMD is also effective. So let's just uninstall it. We're good.
That's a good
Thanks,
one.
Victor. Yeah. I think one of the main takeaways from this whole understanding is kind of what is your blueprint, right? For your cohesive monitoring across your AWS services. What we're trying to do is think about all these different ways to eliminate some of the blind spots within your organization and get to a point that you have automated mechanisms that fit your overall design path, right? So to do that, usually I would say, let's say go on a certain quest, right? And you may say, what type of quest? Is it your first time? I'm sorry, because it's a side quest. Right? Right? There's one person clapping and laughing out there, but we'll say it's all the people, right? They all, because what we have is one side quest. As I put on my voice, that sounds somewhat. Last week we talked about a fintech company. I think we started to talk about the financial services, and what we noticed is there was a couple of conversations held from a DLP perspective of, hey, how can we better optimize our tools? How can we use certain tools? Now, let's flip it to the other side. Maybe instead of a fintech company, we start to go towards maybe tech retail. Ooh, now we have a global e-commerce company, right? Say if they migrated their customer data to the AWS platform. Hey, they started using S3. They started to store the customer records, the transaction data, the business analytics. And again, a security assessment popped up. A wild security assessment popped up and identified the critical pieces of the puzzle that they need to integrate is maybe DLP. Why? Because maybe they have some DLP vulnerabilities. Now our tech retail company has to implement something. They have basic encryption, right? We check that off. We have access controls. But how do we monitor for DLP? This was one of the questions that was posed. So in order to do or understand, we have to take that dramatic pause and bring up our SideQuest board. So our SideQuest board is that visualization that we like to have here on the Safe Room Feature and Security SideQuest, where we start to go a little bit deeper into understanding the customer story. So we have our blank board with our environment. As always, we have our authenticated good users, and then we have our bad actors over here in red. And then we have, hey, there's an S3 bucket in our AWS environment. So what we're trying to get to is understanding, hey, if our theme is Yugi, we will say, hey, what trap card represents your DLP strategy? I throw it to Russ first.
I would probably say, I'd go with Mirror Force, the reactive protection.
That sounds like a good place to start, right? And if you haven't played Yu-Gi-Oh, we're just going down the different paths of, hey, do we have something like data redirection or zero trust, right? And we're just naming it based on the card game. Because if we went with something like Mirror Force, reactive protection, right? There's a couple different routes that you can go with reactive controls. We can have something like, I would say, hey, a lambda function that we can put down. And what does that lambda do? Well, something gets triggered within our environment that kicks off a workflow. And within that workflow, now we start to get down to reacting to what is happening within our environment. So if we go down that path, and stick with me, our original tech retail company, they had the issue of unmanaged maybe data distribution because they have all these S3 buckets. They started to migrate their customer data. They also had some blind spots in that data protection aspect. They maybe had some fragmented DLP controls, and maybe they had different services they might not have known can contribute to their overall DLP strategy. But what we're trying to implement is different mechanisms. And one of those mechanisms could just be something as simple as, hey, we'll do this. Maybe there's an API call that triggers a lambda within the environment. And by doing that, now we can start to get onto the offensive of understanding, hey, what is happening within the environment? What exactly do we need to react to? Mm-hmm. And I pose this question to Russ now. So if sensitive data was a monster type, what attribute would it be?
Sensitive data. I'd probably say dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd go with dark.
Yeah, because I would say that's confidential data, right? That we're using the different properties of cards and things of that nature, light, dark, divine, water, fire. I think dark is a good way to put it because, hey, this is our confidential information. This is our sensitive information. Now we want to make sure that the appropriate responses are in place. So by having something like maybe guard duty to say, hey, there's some malicious, suspicious activity parallel that's occurring within our environment. And I will put down this as well, right? Because this is the route that we can take. You don't always just have one thing triggering in your environment. It's a correlation. And this is where we're trying to get to with our DLP strategy of something's occurring within the environment, something's happening. So why don't we have the different mechanisms? And Macy's off here over to the side. Well, why is it there? Well, it's constantly maybe doing some automated sensitive data analysis to say, hey, there's some sensitive information here. And right now, we might have some potential bad actors within the environment doing something. You're starting to get alerts. Now, what we're trying to make sure that you understand is when you have DLP controls, DLP mechanisms, you start to get to the point of how can we stop this? Right? Well, we deploy something like Macy for the automated data scanning, right? Mm-hmm. Now, what else can we put into play? I think the correlation factor can be something like Security Hub. And I play it face up, right? So if you have Security Hub in the environment, now you start to correlate, okay, is my environment, one, set up based on those regulatory standards that we're talking about, PCI, AWS foundational, security best practices, things of that nature. Because it starts to get to a place where, hey, can we take this one step further beyond and put an event-driven workflow? And you kind of start to see the path, right? Is what are the solutions that we're doing? Well, if we have something like Security Hub, we have Macy, we have maybe Event Bridge. Now you can have an event-driven architecture built into your DLP strategy to say, hey, all these things are starting to happen within the environment. And if it does, take these steps, right? Do this, alert these people, take something offline. All of these are pieces of the puzzle that all lead to a safer environment as we kind of continue to map out the road, right? Because what you want to take the pause to stop and think about is, did we do enough? And that's a question that should be continuously asked in such a manner of, what is our current state and where do we want our future state to do? Because each one of these can be manual steps and processes and procedures. So the thing is, if you don't have an end state in mind, you start to get to, okay, instead of thinking about the singular services, when you have that end state, now you can start to think of how you can fuse these services together to make a better DLP strategy. So with fusion in mind and our theme in mind, because we have to combine these, Russ, what's the fusion strategy here, right? What do you think about?
The fusion, I mean, that's defense in depth right there, right? So, you're not just relying on one thing that can be bypassed. There's multiple things going on. So, you're looking at Security Hub, you're seeing your guard duty alerts, you're seeing your Macy alerts, you're seeing all of these different processes and mechanisms actually, working together and being able to see how that comes together. So, really the entire synergy, I guess, for lack of a less buzzwordy term, integrating and working together, you see that right there. And that's kind of where the strength, in my opinion, of the AWS services lies, is how well they work together to do whatever function it is they're looking to do. And so in this case, it is extremely powerful to see, Macy go off, especially with those custom indicators or the custom pattern matching, and then being able to be like, wow, okay, this is one of my most sensitive materials, what can I do? And in this case that we've just set up, you don't have to do anything. There's automated, resolution for you. So, say for example, you have your most critical data and you set up a rule so that way, if anything alerts on this critical data, like immediately say, the VPC gets quarantined or whatever. That's so powerful to have that, in your back pocket, ready to go, before, you even have to worry about, getting the alert and investigating. Like all of that time, is practically nil when it's all automated and working together. So I think that there's a lot to be said about the power of integrating these services and really creating a comprehensive DLP strategy.
Yeah. And it's funny because the word that popped into my head is polymerization, just because it goes with the theme. But you're right. It's the synergy between all of the services. And then Victor says, yeah, there's so many solutions. Yes, there's so many solutions. That's why you have to sit down and map out a path, right? And how much you recommend a reporting or net segmentation needs. So if you can clarify that question a little bit, the way I'm kind of reading is, how do you recommend to report on the different DLP pieces of your environment, right? And I think this is where it starts to get into, one, the AWS services as a whole, where you say, do I understand what a delegated administrator is, right? Do I have something like control tower within my environment that is kind of managing and pushing out all the different security mechanisms to the different accounts, right? So when you start to go down and understand those paths, then you can start to think about, okay, I have this centralized landing zone or control tower set up. Now I can say I have a centralized logging mechanism, and within that centralized logging mechanism, now you can start to figure out your TDI workflow, right? Because all of these logs can go to a centralized point. It can be a S3 buckets. It can be Amazon Security Lake. It can be other third-party integration points. Think about it, like Cribble or something along those lines, in order to pull all of that goes to your SIM solution. So different mechanisms to report. And I think that brings up a good point, and I hit the pause game button, or as we like to call the Zach Morris timeout, right? Because what we want to think about is exactly that, is how do we also think about the third-party solutions? How do we kind of delve into that? Well, we do this, we get closer, and then we also think about the AWS marketplace, right? So when you think about the AWS marketplace, it overall expands the capabilities beyond the AWS security tool set, right? So it has a bunch of different, partners in there. And within those different partner solutions, you can start to add in things that you may need specific to your overall workflow. First, we understood our workflow. Now we say, hey, maybe we can supplement this with this because it feeds into our overall strategy or environment. Because oftentimes, what we've seen with customers is they are, one, maybe multi-cloud, or they have an on-prem environment. They have existing process procedures and things of that nature that go to specific solutions. Now, by understanding the third-party integrations, now you don't have to necessarily change your entire workflow. You can complement it and optimize it, right? So, for instance, if you're using Cribble as your security type of lake platform, where you're just pushing all your logs to Cribble, okay, can we supplement that with some AWS native tooling? Something like Athena Glue solution, where you can do ad hoc querying, right? So it's not taking away from your overall workflow, but it's just something that can supplement and help enhance your even IR capabilities within your environment, right? Because when an incident happens, sometimes you may want to get closer to the data source within the native tool stack, or maybe you want to look at it from a holistic view, depending on who's actually responding, right? And Russ, what do you think about that? Kind of like when it comes to the IR standpoint, is like more tools, the better, almost, right?
Yeah, it could definitely be like that. It's like having a toolbox. You pick the right tool for the right situation. So, the more tools at your disposal, the more different situations that you can successfully accomplish, because you have the right tools. And having the right tool, is half the battle right up front. So, see it a lot, especially with some of the let's say more common attacks that we see. A lot of the time people don't have any logging whatsoever, and so you're like, well, if it doesn't exist in CloudTrail event history, then it no longer exists for you. So yeah, it's definitely
Yeah,
something we see on our side, and there's just easy strategies to be able to at least protect from I hesitate and don't want to call them script kiddies, but from the less technically inclined attackers that are kind of just spitballing and hope for the best. You can really push away a lot of those kind of sloppy attacks, and those whatever, insert attack as a service, whatever. Yeah, I think that just kind of getting those, having a solution in place, like you said, there's a lot of extra tools out there that would really benefit with the DLP strategy, especially depending on what you're looking to do and what your goals are as an organization. But yeah, I think that there's definitely a lot to be said there. I think as far as automated response workflows, like it's just, I mean, I know I've said it like 100 times in the last couple of weeks, but really the speed at which you can remediate an incident, by having it automated versus doing it manually is huge. Especially as someone who's does manual investigations all the time, that's it can make all the difference, time, especially in an attack like this, well, not in attack like this because we don't have a specific attack, but in an attack situation like this where you do have the automated response workflow set up, so you can auto quarantine sensitive data, which especially if you're doing a defense in depth type of mechanism, then you might be able to quarantine that way before they're even able to access it, or even got to that part of the attack yet. Especially if you catch them on like initial access or something like that, you can have all of those things protected by the time they get into your account. So it is pretty significant how quickly that can really make a difference in incident response in general. Being able to notify security teams that quickly without having to wait, for someone else to notice that there is a high severity finding or whatever. So having the trigger, going through and doing, in this case, it would be an automated assessment based off of, how you set up that trigger. And how you set up your workflow. But it'll do some sort of assessment to match whatever's happening against that criteria that you wrote for the trigger. And then there'll be some sort of action. So you set it up to auto quarantine the data or to notify someone that something's happening. And then at that point is when you can add human manual verification. There's a lot of things that that kind of go into that, because especially with tools like Macy, like they don't work on their own. They integrate with Event Bridge and they work on their own. They just taken to the next level, and they really show their strength when they're integrated with things like Event Bridge and Lambda to be able to produce those custom event filtering or pattern matching recognition. Lambda can remediate actions and integrate with your already existing ticketing systems like Jira and stuff like that. So there's a lot that can be done, a lot that should be done, depending on what your goals are, right? So going in and just ensuring that incident handling procedures are being properly done. So hopefully you have documentation, good documentation and run books. So that way you're going through these processes in a more of a retrospective type of manner, especially because hopefully this is an automated process. So you're really just going to look back and see, did it go through all of the stages: detection, analysis, containment, post-incident recovery, stuff like that. So you can have your responders go through and just verify that everything went according to plan and according to the run books, as opposed to having them have to do all of that manually. So that way they're really just confirming that things were done properly, rather than having to go through the whole process, the whole investigation, just to do what your automated workflow would do in seconds compared to the hours or days it could be for an incident response team. Not that you won't need an incident response team for everything else, but at least especially for your critical data.
Just a scroll of different things, right?
Yeah, pretty much. That's in my mind. That's just how that works. My to-do list is a scroll.
Yeah, we're going to get some scrolls. Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, so it's there's a lot there, right? Especially like for documentation purposes. You can have all of that data right there in a centralized place, like Security Hub. So you could see the actual incident timeline, what actions were taken. You can even automate the root cause analysis. So you can basically have it, have a dashboard and basically spit out, an entire summation of the incident response lifecycle that it took, which again extremely decreases the burden on the manual workflows, which is always something that we in security are trying to do. And so, oh, sorry.
So it's just one thing that I wanted to point out. You need logs, right? Within all of this automation, workflows, and all the greatness Russ is talking about, you need logs enabled throughout all the different regions that you are working in, and you start to go from there, right? Because the last thing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Russ, is you're responding to an incident, and then you look and there's no logs, and it's just kind of sad music that plays. Take that pause.
This is what goes through my head when I roll up to an incident and I'm like, "Where are your logs?" And they're like, "There are none." And I go, "Oh no!"
Yeah,
and that song plays in my head. Yeah.
It's one of those things, right, where you start to get to, hey, what do I do? And I think part of it, is understanding how the different services work and how they work together in that synergy manner that you were saying. And to the different points is, hey, maybe we have to figure out what the combination is that works for our environment. So first step of combination, and we'll take a poll on this, is when you start to think of your combos that go together. Well, let's think about if you were to build your ultimate AWS security sync, what would it be? And this is an interesting piece because now you start to get into the conversation of, okay, which one do I want to play first? Face up in attack or defense mode, right? Russ, where you go?
So originally, I said 1 or 2, but I'm actually going to go ahead and completely backtrack that and go with 4, Security Hub and Organizations, the Command Center combo. I like that one.
Yeah, and that's a good combo right there. And as always, feel free to put 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the chat. And then that way we'll take a poll from that. It's funny because I kind of go with 2 for the fact that it's close and all these are right. There's no wrong answer here.
Exactly.
When you think of guard duty and event bridge, the threat hunter combo is you're actively saying, hey, if something happens in my environment, how do I kind of respond to it automatically? And I'm always pushing towards the preventative, automatic type of controls. So that's kind of where I lean to, because there's so many ways to go about it. And the way you think about your environment structure kind of comes from, one, your experiences within the environment, because you often see the security person will say, hey, this happened within the environment before, and this is what we did. And then that stays with the organization because they build their run books, they build their workbooks around what past they had, right? And what we like to build around is the likes and subscribes that we want to ask on a different platform. But also, we always want to build, hey, how do we kind of challenge ourselves? How do we kind of build ourselves up? Well, one, we say, hey, certificate knowledge, right? And certificate knowledge is important. Why? Because you start to learn all the different services that we were speaking about, but it gives you the foundation to go on a little bit of a knowledge quest. So I would cue another song, but we have a short amount of time. So let us think about, how do we go on a knowledge quest? How do exactly we get to the point where we, one, kind of build some aura, but also get to the point where our knowledge quest is a successful one? And wait, how does that work? How do we have a successful knowledge quest? Well, one, you kind of reach out to us and let us know, hey, we tried these different things, and this is what we learned from the different pieces. We always like to see what worked. But first, you kind of have to start from the beginning, the foundational steps. And those foundational pieces of the puzzle kind of stem from you jumping into the different pieces of documentation. And the documentation for this week is centered around something of the different security services. Right? So I pull up this historical document for a reason. And that reason is, hey, this is the intro to AWS security. And you see publication date 2021. If I am a data protection rookie, I'm looking at all of these different pieces of information. It's like, wait, why is this one out of date? Well, this is how fast everything is evolving. And when you have run books and playbooks and workbooks and all these different things kind of centered around maybe an older paper, now you start to not know, okay, where do we go from here when a new threat is introduced? How do we build threat models? Well, you start to continue down the line of maybe we go specific to a service and start from there. Right? This is the data protection rookie mindset of like, okay, if this was historic and I pull this up and I kind of see a correlation between our old run books and this, maybe we start to see what's new in the different services. So we're talking about data. We're talking about, or if we're speaking about, I should say, how to best secure. I kind of go to the security section of every service and say, hey, what's the security best practices? So now you start to get down the route of, okay, identity policies. Okay, disabling ACLs. You start to see the thought process that goes behind this. Right? Then you start to speed run and you start to get to the point of, okay, now as a developer, AWS encryption SDK, what is it? This is another piece of the puzzle that you're trying to solve live and in action, because you often the time, if you're looking for it, you're the one responsible for it. So you want to dive in and start to go through, what is S3? What is Macy? How do I understand what automated data discovery? What is CSPM? Right? What is our cloud security posture management software? Right? There's different answers and different questions, and that's how eventually you get to a point where you level up and become a data guardian elite. And you eventually get to the place where you can say, hey, I can go to a sample. Maybe if we're thinking about sensitive financial data, we get to a point of, okay, what is out there? Maybe from an architectural standpoint, a pattern standpoint, things of that nature, and kind of delve into it. And you can start to go through different types of workshops and different events, and you start to carve out your pieces of the puzzle that apply to your environment, that apply regulatory standards from an AWS perspective, and you start to become the legend, which is a data champion. These are all parts of your DLP strategy and how you move forward. Because when you look at the different use cases, even though something like this came out in 2020, you still have the references to it. You still have, hey, does this work in the modern day? And that's the curiosity that you want to try and spark and continue as a legend, because legends always know what the other legends are, right? And one of the legendary things you can do is, one, level up your knowledge. And how do you do that? Well, you continue to build experience points, one piece at a time. And then after you do that, you start to think about different kinds of plans, different types of strategies. And one of those strategies, Russ, what is one of the recommended approaches to that?
It's recommended that you always have an incident response plan.
Yes.
Before you have an incident.
Exactly. That's also a cheat code of how you become a legend. So with that being said, think about your DLP strategy, think of your incident response plans, and think about how you can go on some side quests. And let us know next week or the week after or the week after that. But until next time, take care, have fun, and happy Monday. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.